Okay, so I think most people have returned to their seats. So that was the first part of our workflow. Now the next part is we have the update booking request and delete booking. So for update, we're simply going to change the name of the booking from Sally over to James, and then delete, pretty self-explanatory. We want to delete the booking using that booking ID. Now, the issue though is that in both of these requests, the API in question requires an authentication token. So we have to supply that authentication token in some particular format, in this case through a cookie. So we have to, before these two requests can be run, we need to run getAuthToken first to get that token and store it in a variable so we can supply the same auth token in our subsequent requests on step 5 and step 6. So the next part of the workflow, and this goes over several slides, so I might demonstrate a little bit at a time. So first, we'll open our Get Booking by ID requests and go to the Test tab. And what we want to do there is tell Postman that the next request we should run is getAuthToken. So here's Get Booking by ID. Go to the test. We already have a test case in there. And we'll just basically tell Postman that the next request should be getAuthToken. So I'm going to use this line, postman.setNextRequest to getAuthToken, referring to that by name. So I'll save that. Then we will open our RESTful Booker environment and we'll define a new variable called authToken. We'll set a placeholder there, and then we'll open our getAuthToken requests, go to the test tab, and add these two lines in there so we can save the authentication token that we get. So let's do that. So open my RESTful Booker environment, add a new variable called authToken, put a placeholder in the initial value. The current value will be set by my script, so I can just leave it as a placeholder as well. So update. And then we go to getAuthToken down here. And on the test tab there, we're going to add 2 lines. So the first one is to get the JSON response. So that's the var JSON data equals pm.response.json. That gives us access to the JSON object. And then we do pm.environment.set. We set our auth token variable to JSON data.token. So we're looking at the value of the token field in my response. So let's save this. We can't run this just yet. We're missing a few things. So that's the first slide of 2.3. I'll demonstrate the next one, and then I'll give you guys some time to work through it. So next up, we want to define a password variable in my RESTful Booker environment and set its current value to password123. The reason for that is because in this getAuthToken request, in the body of the request, we're sending through our username and password, and the password is being defined as a variable. So we'll go to our environment, define that password, put a placeholder in here, and for the current value, password123. Now that we have those, we can run that getAuthToken request. What we should see is that it'll set the authToken environment variable to whatever my token is. So let's send that. And you can see on the response, token. So on the script, set JSON data.token. The .token refers to this field here, and that is the value. So let's have a look and see if it has set that, and you can see there's a match. authToken is equal to that particular value that I saw in my output. Then we will open up the update booking requests. Now, the way we're going to send our authentication token is that In the API, it is expecting a header, it's expecting a cookie header, and the value of that header is basically our authentication token. So we'll go to update booking. Well, actually, no, at the end of get auth token, we need to tell Postman that the next request is going to be update booking. So you can see there. Let's go to that step there. Yeah, so I missed that step there. Step number 6, update booking. So at the end of that, postman.set next request, update booking, save, and we'll go to the update booking request, go to the headers. We're going to add a cookie header. And the value of that is basically token equals to, and instead of putting the authentication token directly in, we will use our variable, of course, and it'll grab the value from my environment. And then in this update booking, after we do this, our next request is delete booking. So on my test script, I'm simply going to do postman.set next request, and the next one will be delete booking. We'll go to our delete booking requests and do the same thing here. Oh, actually, that's already done for us. So the cookie header, you can see, is already in the delete booking requests. So that is exercise 2.3. So that's up to step number 12. Let's go up to step number 12 for now. And once we're finished with that, I'll demonstrate the remaining steps where we're basically going to run that sequence manually. So exercise 2.3 up to step number 12. Okay, so the last slide for the exercise is to run update booking, run get booking by ID again to confirm that the update was successful, delete it, and then try and get the same booking again, and this time it should say not found. So now that we have our booking ID saved, we have our auth token saved. So I'm going to run update, and we update the record. Now it's a booking for James. Then I'll do a get booking by ID. We're going to retrieve that same record. Our ID is already set, so send that. So this is the updated booking. Then I'm going to delete the same booking, specifying the booking ID. We get booking deleted. Now if I try and do get booking by ID again, because it's deleted, we get a not found. So that sequence works as I expect. That's basically the steps 12 through to 15. So once we can do all of that, that is essentially the workflow completed. So this is now the correct order of our workflow. So get bookings, create new, then get booking by ID, get our auth token, update the booking, and then delete the booking. But so far, we've been running everything manually by hitting send requests. When we do that, that postman.set next request thing is not considered because that's only relevant when you run as a collection. So now let's test our workflow by running the collection. And I'm going to run the collection, and I'm going to ask you guys a little question here. There's going to be some behavior that we get. So choose RESTful Booker, choose our RESTful Booker environment, run this, and you're going to notice that it never stops running. It just keeps on going and going and going. I'm going to stop it here manually. So what's happening? We do get bookings, create new, get booking by ID, get auth token, update, delete. So far so good, but then we just go to get auth token again, update, delete, get auth token again, update, delete, get auth token, update. We're going in that infinite loop between those three requests. Now, does anyone want to have a guess as to why that might be occurring?
Maybe in the delete booking, we have to set next request, nothing there.
Exactly. So delete booking is the last request that we have, but in our test script here, we never set what the next request was. Because we didn't do that, Postman defaults to the next one on our list, which is getOffToken. So then after delete booking, it goes to getOffToken, it runs that, and it sees that the next request should be update booking, so it goes there. It goes to update, and it sees that the next one should be delete, so it goes back to delete, it runs that. We have no next request, so it just repeats that loop again and again and again. So to close it, we need to go to delete booking and do a Postman set next requests and put it to null. This will tell Postman that this is our last request in the workflow. So now if I go to my runner and run this one more time with the environment, after delete booking, that is the final request there, and that's where it stops. So this is exercise 2.4 to run the workflow and then correct it by setting the delete booking as the last request. All right. So hopefully that was enough time for us to run through that workflow. Now, one last thing we're going to do with the workflow is put some conditional logic in there. So with conditional logic, we want to set what the next request is based on what result we get. Say, for example, we're searching for that product. What happens if that product isn't in stock and we can't add it to our shopping cart? Well, we can't progress to the add to shopping cart request, can we? So maybe we'll divert to another request that says add to the wish list, for example. So to implement condition logic, it's basically if statement, if and else. So if something, postman.set next request, and then else something else happens, postman set next request, and we choose a different request to run. So pretty straightforward. In our example, we have that auth token. So when we're getting our authentication token, what if we supply the wrong credentials and it doesn't give us an authentication token? Well, we can't progress to the update and delete booking steps in our workflow, so we have to basically stop the workflow. So this is what we're going to implement. Get auth token. We do a check to see if the auth token was returned. If not, we stop it. And the way we're going to do that is basically on our get auth token requests, we're going to replace that postman set next request line with the following condition logic. So if the JSON data.token is undefined, in which case we never got a value for it, we set the next request to null, else we set it to update booking partial. So we go to get auth token, and we'll replace this line here with our condition. So this if statement here. Save it. Now to test this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deliberately change the password to something that's wrong. And then send. So you see on the response, bad credentials, which means we don't get an authentication token in there. And now if I run this, you see that on my workflow, once we get to get auth token, it stops there. We cannot progress because we failed to get an authentication token. That's exercise 2.5. All right, so that was exercise 2.5 with the conditional logic. So there's the Postman Sandbox API. That's where you can get your list of reference libraries if you want to have a look at what JavaScript libraries are available. And there's also an API reference there as well. So you can see what are the various JavaScript functions that you can use to access your request and response data. So one way we can organize, based on what we've just done, this might influence how we organize our collections. And one little suggestion here is that you have a folder hierarchy, similar to what we have on the right-hand side there. So the top level folder is for basically your API resources like orders or products, users. That'll be top level. Underneath these, the second level folder would contain the test suites for those resources. So for example, for orders, we have start order, edit order. For users, you've got register a user, edit profile, delete account, etc. And then the third level folder might be for slightly more complex tests, which will require a workflow through multiple requests. Like for example, editing an order, you might have to do that through the checkout process. And then as part of that, you also, so this is the checkout folder. And these requests here, start order from cart, specify shipping address, shipping method, payment info, that's all part of checkout. But the general part of editing an order might also include adding and removing a product as well. So that's for the third level folder. This is not a definitive way to organize your collections. This is one suggestion that you might want to use. The other thing to keep into consideration is now we have the API feature where you define an API that basically represents the API that you've implemented, and you can associate multiple collections with that API. Each collection could, in fact, be a test suite. So now your top level hierarchy would be the collection, and then the test suite would be the create new product, edit product details, etc. So you may not necessarily need a 3-level folder hierarchy. Okay, so that's our advanced scripting. So we've looked at pre-request scripts for manipulating data, and we've seen how we can put the result of a request as input in a subsequent request. We did that with the booking ID and with our auth token. And we saw the script, or we talked a little bit about the script execution level as well, how the collection level scripts run first, followed by the folder level, and then the individual request. All right, so the next module is on generating our API documentation. So we're going to create some public and private documentation for our API and talk about what content is generated for us. So Postman can generate and host the web-based documentation based on what we've defined in our collection. So your collection details, the requests that you've set up, and how you basically format that. You can use Markdown when you're formatting your descriptions so that it looks a lot nicer. And there is a private view for the API, which is available for you and people with access to the collection, people on your team that have access to the collection. And then you can publish the docs in order to make it visible to the general public. There's a few different ways to create the documentation. You can basically click on View Documentation to generate the private view if it doesn't already exist. You can publish the public documentation for an existing collection, in which case it'll create the private view as well. So when you create documentation from the New button, you can choose to either Use Collection from that workspace and use an existing collection, and then you just configure the name and the description and hit Create. Or you can just expand the collection and click this View in Web button, and that'll automatically create the private documentation page as well, if it doesn't already exist. If it's there already, then it'll take you to that page. Now, the private documentation is visible only to the author of the collection, unless that collection is shared in your team workspace, in which case anyone who has access to that workspace can see the documentation. Now, the content that is generated will include the descriptions of your collection, your folders, and your requests. And for each request in the collection, the content will show you the configured headers and parameters, the configured request body, if applicable, and you have the option of generating and looking at various code snippets in different programming languages. But you can select that on the documentation page. So here's an example of that. You can choose your programming language. There's the collection name and description. Your list of folders and requests are on the left-hand side. And then for each folder, request, and you have your folder description, request name, request description, and the code snippets displayed on the right-hand side. You'll have an option to select a particular environment, and when you do that, it'll assign any of the environment variables into the location where variables are used in the documentation. But one thing here is that The documentation page only has access to the initial value of any environment variables. It does not have access to the current value. So if you're only setting the current value, you'll find that it's blank when you go to assign these values in the documentation page because it can only read the initial values. So let's generate our documentation. We're going to use the New button. Drop down, New Documentation, and we will select to use a collection from this workspace. The second option there on the tab. We'll use our RESTful Booker collection, and we'll hit Create. So that creates the documentation. You can see I can visit the documentation by going to that URL there, or if I close this window and I want to find where that page is, just expand your collection by clicking on this triangle button, and you go View in Web, and this will open up the page. And here's what it looks like. So here's our left navigation with the folders and requests, and you can see for each request we have some examples on the right-hand side. Now I can choose you'll see that for the request URL, it just says URL, it says the variable itself. So I need to select the environment. Let me refresh that. I need to select the environment first before that's populated. So now wherever we use a variable, that'll be populated with the value from my environment that I've selected. Let's choose a different language. Let's go with Node. And so there's Get Bookings, and there's the example request on the right-hand side. Create new booking, etc. So that's generating our private documentation. So let's do that, and then we'll continue on. All right, everyone got their documentation page? Okay. Now, when we look at that documentation page, what we'll find that's missing and could be useful is, what does the response look like? I'm going to do Get Bookings. This is the example of the request, but what's the response going to look like there? So one thing that's useful with our documentation is to include example responses. And the way we do that is we have to generate some requests and save the response as an example. So it's good to include many different examples, like name them effectively so that when users are looking at your documentation, they understand what each example illustrates. And then when developers are looking at documentation, they know what to expect from that particular request. And have examples for different scenarios. For example, if we, and you can see there, viewing the example responses, we select which one. So our get auth token requests, we can go one of two ways. If we get the wrong password, then it gives us a response that says bad credentials. If we give it the correct password, then we get the actual token itself. So this is a perfect scenario for where we want two different example responses to illustrate two possibilities. To create these, what we'll do, we'll go to our get auth token. And let me close some of these tabs here. I'm going to, first of all, change my password to the wrong password. Send that request. And you can see here on the response, it says bad credentials. So let's save this as a response. Let's go to the Save Response dropdown, and I'll select Save as Example. When we save this, it opens a new tab. You'll notice a little difference in this tab compared to the others. There's an EG next to it. This means we're looking at an example. We're not looking at a request. This is a request. This one here is an example. Now the name here will say get auth token bad credentials. And you can see there's the response that we're going to display, the reason bad credentials. We might also change the configuration of the body. So instead of using the password variable, I'm going to say that if we enter the wrong password, then this is what we get in the response. And I'll click Save Example on the top right, and that saves this example against my getOfToken request. So that's one example. Now, let's also create another example where we actually get the response token. So I'll change my password back to the correct one. And I'll run this. So there's our token. Let's save this response as an example again. And this time we'll say getOfToken, token returned. On the body, I might change the password, and this time I'll say that we had the correct password. I won't actually put what the password is, but this should be enough info to tell people that, in this case, we put in the correct password. Save my example. And now, if we look at the getOfToken requests, on the examples on the top right-hand side, we have 2 of those examples that I've just created. This is also automatically reflected in your documentation. So whenever you make any changes to these requests within a collection, you don't have to update your docs. They will automatically update. So I'm just going to refresh my docs page. And when we go to getOfToken, you can see here, we have the 2 examples, bad credentials. This is the response for that. And token returned, this is the response. So now as a developer, I'm looking at this and I can understand the possible responses I get based on what input I supply. That is exercise 3.2.